was a number of years ago, and I was learning with a young man who was in dental school at the time. He wasn't yet observant, and we were learning Chumash. It was getting close to Pesach, and we learned through the various makkos. And at a certain point, he says to me, "This is incredible. The blood, the frogs, the boils. If God would show me one miracle, I'd believe." I didn't comment at the time, but what this young man was saying is something that a lot of people, I believe, think. If Hashem would show me a nes, if Hashem would show me one clear, overt miracle, it would change my understanding, it would change my perception. I would be a mamin, I'd be the highest level of mamin. And I'd like to share with you that it's not true. It's not true at all. And I'd like to just show you exactly how I know it's not true. And that is because the Egyptians lived through all of the very same makkos that the Jewish people lived through. Now keep in mind, Hashem is the creator and maintainer of all of physicality, of all of the world. And Hashem had many, many ways that Hashem could have taken the Jewish people out of Mitzrayim. But Hashem chose a very particular way. And the Ramban explains why. The Ramban explains that Hashem is not in the miracle-making business. If you're a circus performer, you put on a show Monday night, Tuesday night, Wednesday night, Hashem is not in the miracle-making business. However, one time in history, Hashem was showing the world, the Jewish people, that He is the creator, maintainer, and orchestrator of every facet of physicality. Kriyas Yamsuf, the Makkos, was Hashem's demonstration that He is the one who keeps everything in existence, maintains everything. He is the creator and maintainer of physicality. It was one time in history that Hashem was showing His hand clearly for all to see. And in fact, we now, thousands of years later, have so many mitzvahs surrounding remembering Yetzias Mitzrayim for one reason, because it's the underpinnings of our Emunah system. That being said, did the vast majority of Mitzrayim become frum? Did they become gerim? Was there the Or Sameach Mitzrayim branch? What happened? The vast majority of the Egyptians living through these very same makkos not only didn't believe, until the bitter end, they remained steadfast against Hashem, against Moshe, and denied anything that it was happening. But if you focus on the clear demonstration of Hashem's hand, and you focus on the fact that they were intelligent, thinking people, I believe a question should arise. And that question is, how is it possible? How is it possible for a person to stare at such overt miracles and deny? And we'll spend a few minutes on going through some of the miracles, but just touching on it, just to illustrate the question. Moshe Rabbeinu and Aaron HaKohen show up in the palace of Paro. Uninvited, unwelcomed, they show up, which was clearly an unusual situation, and they show a sign. What's the sign? Aaron takes the staff, throws it on the ground, and it turns into a serpent, to a snake. Paro's undaunted. He does the same. He calls his machshefim, his little boys from the academy, the Black Magic Academy, and they did the same. Now, apparently, Mitzrayim were steeped in this. There is something called kishuv. Kishuv is not an optical illusion. Kishuv is not sleight of hand. Kishuv is an ability to control the upper worlds that control the lower worlds. When Hashem created the world, Hashem made it multi-dimensional. Every physical object in creation has a spiritual counterpart. And Kishuv is a manner of manipulating the upper worlds so that it has physical manifestations in this world, because again, everything physical has a spiritual counterpart. The Mitzrayim was steeped in that, and not only wasn't Paro moved, he said, "Boys, come on, show me the trick." They all took their staff, threw it on the ground, and turned into a serpent. At which point, Aaron took the staff and threw it on the ground, and it swallowed up all of the rest of the serpents on the ground. The Ramban says at that point, Paro knew he was outclassed. Paro said to himself, what if he takes that stick and says to it to swallow me and my throne? Paro at that point already recognized that he was dealing with something well out of his league, but he remained obstinate. And if you study the Makkahs, each one was a more clear demonstration of Hashem's control over every facet of physicality. 7 Makkahs, one after another, finally 10. But you have to remember that each Makkah began with warnings. Moshe Rabbeinu and Aaron would come daily to the palace and warn, this is what's going to happen. Rashi explains that for 3 weeks, for 21 days, Moshe and Aaron came to the palace and said, all of the water in all of Mitzrayim, everywhere, wherever it may be, will turn into blood. Lo and behold, the appointed day comes, and every drop of water, wherever it may be hidden, wherever it was, the entire Nile and everywhere else that water was, turned into thick, globulous, smelly blood. And for 7 days, the Mitzrayim lived with this, unmoved, untouched. The next Makkah, Moshe Rabbeinu and Aaron come warn, Hashem's going to bring Sfardeya. Now, if you think about Sfardeya is a little bit humorous. As a matter of fact, the story is told that the Chofetz Chaim was once being Maver Sedra, he was in Shmuz, and in the middle of being Maver Sedra, he starts laughing. Someone said, Rishiva, what does Rishiva find so funny about Chumash? Chofetz Chaim said, don't you understand? I'm thinking a big, paro, important man on his throne, and the frogs jumping here, there. It's very funny. And if you think about it, the Makkahs are very funny. We have fun with our children at the Seder table, playing out the Makkahs, but the pasuk is very clear. Es asher salalti b'Mitzrayim. Hashem says to Moshe, I'm going to bring osai, I'm going to bring signs. Why am I doing this? For the Mitzrayim to see, for you to tell over to your children and your grandchildren, Es asher salalti b'Mitzrayim, that I toyed with the Mitzrayim, I played with them. The Makkahs are funny because, in fact, Hashem was demonstrating that he's not a bar plukta, he's not exactly a combatant on the same level with the Mitzrayim. He toyed with them, showing demonstrating his control over every facet of physicality. But if you study the Makkahs one by one, you see tremendous illustrations. The Makkah of Svardeya, the pasuk says, "V'tal ha-Svardeya," thus Svardeya came up. And Rashi explains that it was one large Svardeya comes out of the Nile and begins making a beeline directly towards Paro's palace. Now this very large frog starts making its path. The guards see it and they hit it and smash it. And that frog split into 2. Then they smash that one. Hit, split. And before you knew it, this frog split until you had an entire country filled with frogs. Now, the Stipler Gaon asks a very interesting question. It's not regular, not everyday fare that you hit a frog and it splits. So imagine that you're one of the gods and the frog comes up. Now, again, you've been warned for 3 weeks. You already lived through a month of Dam. And Moshe Rabbeinu warned there's going to be frogs. You hit the frog and it split, hit the frog and it split. Stop! Let's say there are 16 frogs in Mitzrayim. It's a big country. With 16 frogs, you can manage to get by. Stipler answers that these frogs were so bothersome, they jumped in you, on you, get out, you couldn't help but hit them, split. And before you knew it, billions and billions of frogs, and the land was filled with a cry, a you, the tremendous sound of these frogs filling everywhere. You couldn't lie down without these frogs, you couldn't sit, you couldn't move, you couldn't sleep. And for 7 days they were there, and for 7 days the Mitzrayim's life was Gehennim. But it's very interesting to note that the pasuk says it wasn't just in Mitzrayim, but rather Talat Sardeya, and the pasuk is very clear. It's going to be in you, ubitanorecha, ubecha, ubavdecha. It's going to be inside everywhere. The frogs jumped into the ovens. From there, Mishal Vazari learned to make Kadashim Shemayim. But the frogs jumped into the Mitzrayim themselves, into the innards, and croaked from within, letting out this bellow for 7 days. Now, I want you to imagine that you are a Mitzri in Mitzrayim. And imagine you lived already through Dam. 7 days of all of the water, wherever you are, wherever, turned into blood. Unless you bought it from a Jew, it remained blood, then it was water. And now, throughout the land, throughout the land of these frogs jumping and croaking. And imagine you're Muhammad. Imagine you're a simple enough Mitzri. And after 3 days, you begin to realize, oh my goodness, this is crazy. I can't sleep, I can't move. And I've seen what happens. I saw what happened to my buddy. A frog jumped down his throat and it's croaking from within. And Muhammad is a tough guy and he says to himself, I am not going to let that happen. No frog getting down my throat. First morning, after 3 days, he clenches his teeth during breakfast and he eats breakfast with his mouth closed. No frog getting down my throat. No way, it's not going to happen to me. And he's okay for breakfast. He's okay for lunch. But then when he gets up midday, he looks up, he goes left, and a frog goes left. He goes right, and the frog goes right. He goes back, and the frog goes back. Oh my goodness, I'm being stalked by Kermit. And you're not getting down my throat, you stupid, Ribbit, ribbit. And Kermit ended up in his stomach croaking for the next 4 days. Now frogs don't jump down throats. Frogs don't live within human stomachs. But every Mitzri got to see, as Asher Salal to Mitzrayim, Hashem was toying with them. And they lived through the week of that. And finally, Paro says, when? Get it out of here, get it out of here. Moshe Rabbeinu says, when do you want it to go? Lamacha, tomorrow. And Moshe Rabbeinu takes his staff, makes a line on the wall. When the sun gets to this point tomorrow, the Makkah will stop. The next day, when the sun got to that point, a tremendous stoppage. All the noise stops. And all of the frogs died. But Siborim, piles and piles and piles. But Tiva Sha'aretz, the land was filled with a stench. Because everywhere that you were, there were these mounds and mounds of dead frogs. And the Mitzrim got to live with the cleanup. And they got to live with what was going on. And now that's 2 months into the debacle. The Sforno explains that from the very beginning, from the start of the Makkahs, the Shibud really ended. The Mitzrim were no longer acting as slave masters to the Jewish people, because already they realized that something's going on over here. But then we get to Kinim. Now Kinim doesn't sound so bad. Kinim, lice, what's lice? Lice is a tiny little thing, they love to get their little tiny legs in your hair follicles, dig in, kind of lay their eggs and all. Okay, what's the big deal? The Mitzrim was so afflicted that the Machshefim couldn't stand in front of Paro. They were covered head to toe with lice, every inch, everywhere. Thick, thick mounds and mounds wherever you sat, wherever you walked. Everything in Mitzrayim was covered with lice. But it's not just everywhere in Mitzrayim. It's Kol Ha'aretz, the entire land, and the Medrash explains to us that there were land disputes between Mitzrayim and various countries. Every land dispute was settled. Why? Because you could determine the border of Mitzrayim. It was like a laser cutting it out. You dug into the ground and 3 tefachim deep. You didn't have earth. You had kinim, lice. 12 inches deep of lice, but only if that land was legitimately Egypt. If it was a different country, it remained dirt. And wherever you were, wherever there's lice creeping and crawling, and you can't scratch, you can't move, you can't. For 7 days. And now it's been 3 months. 3 months and the Mitzrim are being toyed with. Work stops. This is an agricultural society. When all of the water turns to blood, things stop. When everywhere there's frogs and kinim, everything stops. And the Mitzrim had a lot of time to think about what's happening. And again, Moshe Rabbeinu and Aaron show up daily to the palace, warn what's going to be. There's going to be another Makkah. There's going to be another Makkah. And if you go through each of the Makkahs, we don't have time to go through each one now. There's a series on the Shmuz site, or listen to the podcast. It's called Living Through the Makkahs. But if you study each of the Makkahs, and you see the incredible complexity, and you hear the warning, and you hear Orov. Orov, mixed multitude of animals. What's the big deal? Mixed multitude of animals means the entire land of Mitzrayim is filled with lions and tigers and bears and attacking. And anywhere a Jew walked, he was safe. Anywhere a Mitzri walked, lions, tigers, bears, whatever the animals were attacking. And imagine that you're a Jew walking down the street. Here, kitty, kitty, kitty. Oh, nice little lion. The Mitzri over there. Go get it. The clear distinction between Jew and Egyptian. And the Egyptians' houses, even their pets, even their loyal dog, loyal Fido, turned against them. And again, when you study and you think about the fact that month after month, they're living through a clear demonstration of Hashem's hand, but they're not getting it. Let's look at Barad. Barad is after more than 6 months. Everything stopped by the 3rd month. There's no work. No one's doing anything. They're thinking, they're watching, they're paying attention. And Moshe Rabbeinu comes to Paro and says, please, all of the animals, all of the slaves, bring them into the houses. Because Barad isn't just little hailstones. You know, you go in the summer and you're driving and all of a sudden there's a little bit of hail. So you put up the radio a little bit louder to drown it out. Barad was not little hailstones. And Barad was softball-sized chunks of ice. Inside the ice was fire. Now Rashi's bothered by the problem that water and fire don't exist. Either the water extinguishes the fire or the fire evaporates the water, but they can't coexist. Also shalom, they made peace. They made peace, that's Rashi's answer. Inside the block of ice, that which can't be was fire, it was, and this huge block of ice would come down, smash, and break open, the fire would burn what's ever left in the fields. And Moshe warns, please, Paro, tell your people, the animals, the livestock, the slaves, bring them into the houses because anything in the field is going to be killed. And astonishingly, the pasuk says, "Hayore es dvar Hashem me'avdei Paro." Those who feared Hashem, the few who actually feared Hashem, brought their slaves and their animals in. The rest of the people said, "We don't care," and they left their animals. They left. We don't believe in this stuff. We don't believe in climate change. We don't accept this stuff. And it didn't matter what Paro told his people. It didn't matter how clear Moshe Rabbeinu made it. They didn't accept. And make no mistake, people assume that Paro had no free will. The Mitzrayim had no free will. The Rishonim explained for the first 5 makkahs, Hashem did not even harden Paro's heart. It was only after 5 makkahs, finally, it was so overwhelmingly clear, so powerfully clear that Hashem is in charge, that the Sunnah says that Paro lost free will. And it was like the boot was so on his head that Hashem had to harden his heart to bring him back to equilibrium so that it could be his decision. But explains the Sunnah throughout the entire process, Paro and the Mitzrayim had free will. For the first 5 makkahs, Hashem didn't even affect their heart, wasn't even hichpid libo. And even in the end, it was only to bring them back to equilibrium. So here's the question. How could they live through month after month of the most clear, obvious demonstration of Hashem's control over every facet of nature? And how could they not believe? How can they not become Aminim? Now, for the record, some of the Mitzrayim did start believing. By Makkah's Bechoros, which we're now talking almost a year into things, and Moshe Rabbeinu, Aaron HaKohen, in front of Paro say, every firstborn in Mitzrayim is going to die. At that point, the Medrash explains to us, the Bechoros realized that they were in trouble. For 9 months, time after time, exactly what Moshe Rabbeinu said is going to happen, happened down to the T. And now he says that every firstborn is going to die. And the Bechorah, the firstborns, come to Paro and says, stop, we got to let him go. Paro says no. And it was an armed rebellion. It was a civil war. Paro put down the rebellion and stood steadfast. And in fact, lo and behold, exactly b'chatzos halayla, exactly at the stroke of midnight, every single firstborn in Mitzrayim dies. But the pasuk says, "Ein bayis asher ein sham meis." There was not a house that didn't have a dead person in it. Now, if they had a bechor, firstborn boy, fine. But if not, what does it mean there was no house that didn't have a dead body? Rashi explains, the elder of the house died. Imagine you had nuclear families, so you had uncles, Uncle Bob and Uncle Shmuel. Uncle Bob was 80, Uncle Shmuel was 82. Guess who died? In some houses, you had more than one child that died because the Mitzri women were promiscuous. And if one boy was the firstborn of one person and the other son was the firstborn of another Mitzri man, both died. Rashi explains that there were some houses that 5 children died. Now I want you to imagine for a minute that you are Cleopatra. And I want you to imagine that right in front of your eyes, you see 5 of your children die. And what you suddenly realize is, oh my goodness, 25 years ago I met someone, no one knew about it. I didn't tell my girlfriend, nobody. And that from that union came this son. That son's dead. 5 years later, I met another guy, and now that son's dead. 5 years after that, five of our children die in front of our eyes. And imagine that you would have witnessed Cleopatra at the burial of five of her sons. And she turns to her friends and she says, girls, look, five of my children, my boys, five, listen to me. Girls, please promise me, watch your health. No red meat, please guard your cholesterol. Lady, are you playing with a full deck? But the Mitzrim didn't get it. They didn't become Amim. They didn't accept Hashem Elokim. They didn't fall on their face and say, yes, God is the creator. Quite the opposite. Until the bitter end, they remain steadfast in their conviction against a creator. And if you'd like to really understand the true wonder of it all, it's Kriyas Yamsuf. It's a splitting of the sea. You see, after Makas Bechoros, Paro gets up in the middle of the night with his people and says to Moshe, get out of here. And they force the Jewish people, get out of here. Moshe says, we're not leaving at night. We have to wait till the day. And the Jewish people marches out. That country that not a single slave ever left. 3 million people, 600 men between the age of 20 and 60. If you add the women, add the children, add the elderly, you're dealing with a group of at least 3 million people march out. By Degel, each shevet under its flag, they march out into the desert. But they march out with the wealth of Mitzrayim, with all of the gold, all of the silver. And Paro sent spies along with them, and Beinachem Am, the land, Hashem sort of brought them in a circumvented manner, and the spies come back to Paro and say they're lost in the Midbar. Paro says to his people, they've taken our wealth. Let's go. He mounts the charge himself, and he and his people charge out to chase down and bring back the Jews. And astonishingly, when the Jewish people went into the Midbar, they were Anei Kavod. An Anan Kavod is a pillar of cloud. The pillar of clouds lit up the night as if it was day. It made the ground smooth. It kept them air-conditioned, cool in the heat of the desert. And as the Mitzrim came charging against the Jews are against the sea, and the Mitzri army charges, the Anei Kavod, the pillars of cloud that had been in front of the nation, came back, went in front of the Jewish people. The Mitzrim tried to charge, and it stopped them. Now, the next time you're flying in a plane and you look out and you see the fluffy, billowy clouds, ask yourself, why isn't the plane just stopped in midair? Because clouds are vaporous. It's just condensation, just evaporated water. This Anan, this cloud, was a little bit different. It was Hashem's manifestation in the physical world, and Hashem said, this is what's going to be. And the Mitzrim tried to charge, but they couldn't penetrate. They shot arrows. The arrows didn't penetrate. Fire arrows, nothing. And the entire night, they stand there trying to charge. Get the Jews! And then the Ramban says something fantastic. And the Ramban says, Vayet Moshe shodo alayam. Moshe puts out his arm on the sea. Vayolach Hashem es yam beruach kodim azah. Hashem began splitting the sea with a powerful eastern wind, kol halayla, the entire night. V'yasam es yam l'charava, and it made the sea into dry land. And the Ramban explains what happened. Moshe holds out his staff, and suddenly an eastern wind starts blowing. And it starts blowing across the expanse of the sea. And it starts blowing, and slowly a furrow within the Yam starts forming, and another furrow, and it get deeper and deeper, and as the night wears on, 12 separate channels begin being dug out of the Yam, and the entire night passes, that those furrows get deeper and deeper, the channels get clearer and clearer, until the entire Yam was split into 12 separate parts, and then the Jewish people entered the Yam. The Jewish people entered the Yam, and when the Jewish people were at the midpoint, Hashem lifted up the Anei Kavod, and the Mitzrim saw the dry land which had been the sea, and they had seen the wind splitting it, and the Egyptians chased the Jews into the Yam. But the Ramban's bothered by one problem. Why did Hashem split the sea in this particular way, with an eastern wind all night long? Explains the Ramban that was part of the plan. Hashem wanted the Mitzrim to have what to hang their hat on. Hashem split the sea with a wind. Why? Because then the Mitzrim could say, it's not Hashem, it's the wind. The Ramban explains, even though, of course, the wind isn't going to split the sea into channels, and not just when your enemy's there, and it's not going to dry it, but they didn't pay attention to that. They ran after them, Merov Tavosam Laralahem, because of a tremendous desire to harm the Jews, to get back at them, and they ignored the reality, ignored the facts, and went chasing the Jews right into the Yam. And here is the question. They were sane, rational people, no different than you or I. They weren't robots. They weren't on psychedelic drugs. They were regular, rational, sane people. How did they do something so foolish? How could they live through 10 months of seeing Hashem's manifestation of controlling every facet of physicality? How could they live through such demonstration that Hashem is the creator, maintainer of the world? How could they live through Kriyas Yamsov and say, the wind did it? How could they be so dumb? And the answer to this is based on understanding this feature called free will. And it's something that we typically don't spend much time thinking about. Free will is not a simple concept at all. And I'll explain to you what I mean. If you were a child in Cheder, you learned about Malachim, and I'm sure you learned that a Malach doesn't have free will. Right? A Malach doesn't have free will. People, man has free will. Malachim don't have Bechira, they don't have free will. I'd like to share with you that is 100% false. Malachim have Bechira, have free will, just as man does. And the difference between man and a Malach has nothing to do with free will. You see, when Hashem took Adam and put Adam into the world, it was to give him what we call practical free will. Not theoretical free will, but practical free will. You see, free will means where I could just as easily go this way or go that way, and it's my choice. You see, a Malach sees with absolute clarity, with absolute clear vision, everything that Hashem commands is for its benefit and the benefit of the world. Everything that Hashem warns against is detrimental to that creation as well as the creation in general. The reason why a Malach won't disobey Hashem is because it's so foolish. It's kind of like my putting my hand in a fire. Right? Imagine I offer you $100. Here, $100 if you put your hand in the fire for a minute. I taught high school for many years, and I had guys, when I gave them that mushal, they would say, well, Rebbe, what about $50 for 30 seconds, $25 for 10 seconds? I guarantee, no matter what amount of money, no matter what amount of time, you wouldn't put your hand in a fire. Why? Because it's self-inflicted damage. It's foolish. A Malach won't disobey Hashem because it's foolish. It recognizes the destruction, the damage that it does. Anytime a Malach veers off, it's because it miscalculates. Maybe it feels too much the honor of Hashem, feels it's not appropriate for the kavod Hashem to allow something to happen. It's sometimes a Malach will make a miscalculation, but a Malach has Bechira, but it sees things with such clarity that it would never violate the will of Hashem because it recognizes the damage. But that was not the way Hashem made you and I. You see, when Hashem put us into the world, it was with the ability to actually choose. We were granted the capacity to be greater than Malachim, or the opposite, but we were granted the capacity to change the essence of I. But that capacity means that we're given 100% free will, that I am the bocher. But I am the one who chooses means I have to just as easily be able to do this or to do that. But it's got to be an even choice. A Malach sees things with such clarity that it would never sin, but that's not the human being. When Hashem took the human being, and Hashem took the neshama and put it into this body, Hashem put us into this body that's thick and occluded, and I don't see, I don't realize, I don't recognize. I don't recognize the results. I don't realize I'm going to die. I don't realize I'm going to stand in front of Hashem. I don't realize the value of mitzvahs. I don't realize the damage of averas. But more than that, even that was not enough to give man free will. Why? Because within me is a neshama. Within me is a neshama that's brilliant and clearly sees that one day I'm going to stand in front of Hashem and answer for everything that I did. And more than that, my neshama clearly gets it. Every mitzvah helps me. For eternity, I'm going to shine like a brilliant sun. Or the opposite. Every avera damages me. So even if you put the neshama into a body and it's clouded and it's covered up and it's like putting a hand into a ski glove and it can't feel, lamaisa, still the human being doesn't have free will. And therefore Hashem created one more feature in the human to give us actual free will. It's something called imagination. Imagination is this creative ability to envision, to imagine, and to feel it like it's real. If you've ever read a novel about a pirate sailing the seven seas, and he's swashbuckling in a sword fight, and suddenly, oh, you're scared. Why? What are you scared? If you ever read a romance and you started crying, or the hero who was about to win the Olympic gold, and you felt, what do you mean you felt? What do you mean you were crying? But if you've watched a play, if you've gone to the theater, you know that the casting director is given a very particular job. When they choose the actor, the casting director's job is to find the actor who's not just a great actor, but who's credible in the role. But credible means the audience identifies with him. So when the actor is going down that alleyway and the music starts changing tempo, it's not him who's in trouble, it's me. And when he gets into that fight and is rolling on the floor, it's not he that's fighting for its life, it's me. And as any casting director knows, the perfect actor is the one that the audience identifies with, feels it, and it's not the actor who's living through that moment. It's I, the person reading the book, seeing the movie at the theater. And that is an incredible feature of imagination. And imagination is this ability to go into flights of fancy and to feel like it's real. I imagine I'm there. I feel I'm there. I close my eyes and fantasize, and suddenly I feel differently. The main reason why Hashem gave us this koach of imagination is because imagination allows for free will. You see, now when I want to do something, and my neshama says, you can't do that because that's wrong, I have this ability to create an entire fanciful world where what I want to believe is good, right, and proper. And if you find me a human being in history, the most heinous criminal, they didn't say what I'm doing is evil and wrong. They came up with a philosophy. Mein Kampf is an 800-page treatise where Adolf Hitler outlines why it's good for the world, why he's servicing mankind by killing the Jews. The Jews are vermin, and defending God's handiwork by defending against the Jews. And every criminal, every evil person rode on a white steed, wore a white hat, because Hashem gave us this ability to actually choose. But free will means the ability to deny that which I don't want to accept. And before I'm going to make a choice, it's not a choice between what's good and what's bad, evil and good. It's a choice of what do I want to accept, what do I want to believe. And the minute that I really want something and I decide to do it, my mind is a supercomputer that spews out logic after logic that explains why what I'm doing is good, noble, and proper. And if you'd like to see that, that's exactly the mitzvah. You can show them the ball of the sun, and they could say, nah, it's midnight. They lived through Dam Tzvadei, they lived through 10 months, almost a year, of living through Hashem destroying. They went from being the wealthiest nation to being totally poverty-stricken. They were destroyed. Yet they didn't see the hand of Hashem. Why? Because that is what real free will means. Free will means you're not hand-shackled to reality. You're not handcuffed to facts. You could believe what you want to believe, and if you don't want to accept Hashem, you could stare at the most incredible miracles and say, I'm not moved, I'm not impressed. Whatever, blood, frogs, lice, no big deal. Splitting the sea, it's the wind. And that would sound strange. And it would sound impossible. It would sound something that just you can't hear if it weren't for the fact that we live with that on a day-to-day basis. you'll find very intelligent, very well-read, very articulate people saying the most incredible things. The world? It just evolved. Some lucky roll of the cosmic dice and 100 billion galaxies, each containing 100 billion stars, each as strong as the sun or stronger, came into being. What a lucky roll of the cosmic dice. And as strange as it sounds, you could find very intelligent people saying such things. And they write books, and they lecture. And of course, they're professors, because to be really, really dumb, you have to attend university. And to be really steeped in it, you have to be a professor of it. And you could read treatises, you could read books, you could read entire courses on this theory. So let's deal with this theory for a minute, this theory of evolution, and let's ask the very same question that we asked on the Ramban. I'd like to ask three questions. I'd like to ask three questions on evolution, and I think we'll see how honest an evolutionist truly is. Question number one begins as follows. When I was a kid, I was about maybe 11 or 12 years old, and I had some trouble with my knees. I was studying martial arts, and I went to the orthopedist, and he looks at my knee, moves it back and forth, takes some x-rays, and says, "Son, you have chondromalacia patella." I said, is that bad? He said, I don't know. I said, "What is chondromalacia patella?" He said, "Well, in the back of your kneecap, there's some extra cartilage forming." I said, "Oh, what do I do?" "Well, brace, don't worry about it, no big deal." And I discovered something at a very tender young age, and that is that medicine and much of science likes to use very big terms, preferably with Latin roots, and they have these beautiful big terms, chondromalacia patella, whatever the terms are that well define the scientific processes or the mechanisms behind things. Okay, so let's begin with the following. Where did it all start? What's the fundamental of all of science, fundamental of all of nature? Where did it all begin? It began with the Big Bang. Now, Big Bang is not very sophisticated sounding. Big Bang is sort of like when Moshe, the 4-year-old, hears a fire truck down. "Hey, Mommy, the truck made a big bang." Big Bang doesn't sound very sophisticated. But the reason why Big Bang is not a big fancy Latin word is because it's not a very sophisticated concept. And I'll explain to you what I mean. Big Bang. Let's start with question number one. What banged against what? Right? I have this hand, I have this hand. I bring them together, I make a bang. But before there was physicality, before there were quarks, before there were quantum mechanics, what existed to bang against what? Well, energy and matter are just givens, electricity, electromagnetism, the strong principles, weak forces. So let's in fact give. Let's in fact give that all of physicality, neurons, neutrons, everything from the atom to molecules, it just happened. It just happened. Let's say everything inert. Everything inert, just big bang, and 100 billion galaxies each. Okay, it all came into existence. All right, so question number one is what banged against what? Let's come to question number two. Have you ever watched a spider? A spider most spiders are blind, and orb spinning spiders will spin a very, very complex spider web. Most orb spinning spiders will spin their web each night. They'll throw an anchor thread, whether it be from one tree to another, and then they'll start this complex system. You see, the system of the spider web, actually it looks like the spokes of a bicycle. You have the spokes going this way, and then threads going that way. And the spider will spin this web. It'll take quite a while to spin it, and it'll go from one to the other, first creating the radials, kind of the spokes, and then the parts going around the center. Now, here's the interesting thing. The spider web is the ideal geometric shape to be able to withstand wind, to allow wind to pass through, and yet be strong enough to catch flies or wasps or whatever it's going to catch. But somehow it is that the spider not only knows the exact formation, It somehow knows to drop beads of glue every once in a while, not on the parts that it's going to walk on, the spokes, but only on the circular parts. Somehow it knows to drop these beads. Somehow it knows to sit in the middle of a spider web, and in complete darkness, when a moth hits it, the spider instantly knows what type of insect it is. If it's a wasp, it gently comes from behind. If it's a moth, it'll go from the front. It'll begin spinning its web around that insect and will suck out the juice. And the spider somehow knows to create that spider web. Do you know how strong a spider web is? They say the web of a spider is stronger than any known human structure. They say that if you were to create a 1-inch strand of it, it could stop a fully loaded 747 in mid-flight. It's so strong, yet so flexible, and yet somehow the spider knows how to spin it. Have you ever given an IQ test to a spider? And if the first question is, what banged against what? Meaning, where did molecules come from? Where did atoms come from? Where did energy come from? Where did electricity come from? If the first question is, what banged against what? The second question is, who taught you to do that? Who taught the falcon to jump before it smashes its wings against the ground? Who taught the robin to hunt for the worm? Who taught the cow to eat grass? And who taught the tiger to hunt? And when you study the world and you see such incredible complexity and everything in harmonious systems, and you ask each animal, who taught you to do that? Who taught you to hunt? Who taught you to stalk? But if you haven't yet really gotten the idea that something strange is going on here, let me share with you one more observation. It was November 10th, 1983, when Microsoft made that big announcement. Windows. Windows was going to change the world. Now, for those of us who remember it, before Windows, you had one single screen. And Windows was supposed to be this whole new concept. You could be operating one window and at the same time another. You could operate your word processor and your Excel spreadsheet at the same time. A brand new world. Okay, in any case, they made the announcement, and it was the type of hype that a Super Bowl Sunday would have, and Microsoft ended up with some pretty bad press because the day came and Windows wasn't ready. You see, the programmers were writing it, and it was supposed to take them about 6 months, but they kept writing and writing and writing, and it ended up taking 90 man-years to write the code. A man-year means, imagine you have a man who sits all day writing code, 40 hours a week, 50 weeks a year. You have to have a team of 90 of them to write because the code was so complex that it took 90 man-years to write. And in fact, finally the Windows came out and in fact had its effect. Nowadays, when Microsoft writes code, it's no longer measured by man-years. It's by dozens of years, sometimes hundreds of years, programs after programs built, sometimes even 1,000 years of coding goes into a program. When the first space shuttle was launched, someone estimated how much coding went into the space shuttle. And they estimated that there were at least 22,000 man-years to write all the code. You had so many different systems. You had the navigation system, you had the fuel management system, you had to keep the oxygen. You had so many different systems in place that the coding for all the computerization in the space shuttle had 22,000 man-years. It wasn't one human being who could even recognize it all, test it all. It was done by teams and teams of people, and that was a major accomplishment. The space shuttle was sent up successfully. Okay, now, ask a biologist, ask a chemist, ask a neurologist a very simple question. What is more complex, the space shuttle or a human baby? Space shuttle, no comparison. Take one cell in the human body, and it's far more complex than any space shuttle man could ever imagine. And I'd like to share with you a very interesting observation. The human baby begins from a cell about the size of the period at the end of a sentence. That's the egg. A sperm cell, which is 1/10 of that size. And from those two cells, divides and divides and divides and divides. And suddenly you have a fully formed baby born healthy and alive. Here's the question. Who wrote the coding? All of the coding that tells each cell what to do and how to do is contained in the DNA. But DNA is not something that you and I are going to see. It's true that with an electron microscope now they can see the double helix, but all of the coding for the entire baby, for the trillions of cells of the baby, are contained within that one sperm cell and that one egg cell. When they join together, the DNA is formed, and then each cell within that baby has a complete set of DNA. The DNA is so tiny that, again, if you multiply it, if you examine it under 100,000 power microscope, you can see the outline of it. But it contains so much information that they say it's the equivalent of the Encyclopedia Britannica, 1,000 volumes of it. But that amount for each cell in the body, replicated again and again. And when you realize the complexity of a protein molecule, the complexity of a cell, the complexity of an organ, and you realize that all of this happens without a human being seeing, you begin to realize there's something strange going on here. And if you believe that that just happened, that just evolved, I'd like to share with you, you're living in a very, very delusional world. And I believe that looking at the world today, you see a parallel to Mitzrayim with incredible, eerie commonality. The Mitzrayim saw Hashem and denied it, and modern man sees Hashem and denies it the same. The Rambam says the most effective, greatest way to see Hashem is study the world. Look at the complexity. Look at harmonious systems. Open a biology textbook. Open a chemistry textbook. I used to say biology should be renamed Emunah 101, chemistry Emunah 102, physics Emunah 103. You study the creation. Look at the wonders of this creation and tell yourself these words. If this is the creation, what does it tell me about the Creator? And when you study the world, you see your Creator. Yet people study this, steeped in it. They can quote for you chapter and verse, and they don't see the most obvious, that there's a brilliant, capable Creator orchestrating it, creating it, keeping it. That was the Mitzrayim many years ago. They lived through all the Makkahs and denied Hashem. They lived through Kriyas Yamsuf and denied Hashem. And that is our modern evolutionist. I think what this Ramban is sharing with us is that is Bechira. To allow for free will, Hashem gave us this incredible capacity to believe exactly what we want to believe. I'm not married to facts. I'm not bound to the truth. If I don't want to accept it, if I don't want to believe it, I can create my fanciful world and don't bind me to reality. And the reason why Hashem did that is because now man has free will. Unlike a malach who sees things with such clarity and never would do things, much like I wouldn't put my hand in a fire, the neshama is so smart, so brilliant, it would never damage itself. So how do you give a neshama free will? You put it in a body where it's blind, you give it an imagination, and now I have the capacity to believe exactly what I want to believe. I don't want to accept God. I believe it evolved, some lucky roll of the cosmic dice, and all came into being, and now I'm good. I could do what I want, when I want, with whom I want, as I want. I'm free from the shackles of God. And the way that Hashem allowed for free will is by allowing this thing called imagination, allowing for us to believe what we want to believe. That's what the Mitzrayim did, and I believe, again, that's what you watch when you look at modern science. And when you think about the Big Bang, and that's what brought it all about, I think it's no different than watching the Mitzrayim follow the Jews into the Yam. And I want to close with one last observation. It was a number of years ago when my wife was expecting our fourth child, and the due date was right around Yom Kippur. Now, we made all the preparations with a neighbor who would call the cab, if whatever. Anyway, as it turned out, Yom Kippur morning, my wife went into labor, and we quickly got on the phone with the doctor, and the doctor said, you better get here now. But there was no time for calling cabs. I got in the car, put my kids, sent them off, drove my wife to the hospital, and I show up on Yom Kippur 20 minutes after we got into the building, my wife gave birth. Now, you have to understand, we already had 3 kids, and as a family, we had been experiencing this pregnancy in a very real way. There was then a DVD called The 9-Month Miracle, and it showed you incredible pictures. It was a DVD containing in vitro pictures of the baby as it was forming. And we sort of like watched the formation. And in the second month, you could see the development of the human head. It's disproportionately large. And then, because you see the development of the brain, then the limbs start forming, the toes, the fingers. And by the end of the third month, the fingers and toes are fully developed. Then you could even tell if it's a boy or girl at that age. By the fourth month, the face looks human. And we were watching this picture and kind of like looking at the embryos, the picture of the embryos, and comparing it to the pregnancy. And for my family, it was a tremendous lesson in Emunah, for me as well. And Yom Kippur, when I drive my wife to the hospital, and 20 minutes later we have a healthy, beautiful baby girl, I was high. And I guess I was a little bit too exuberant, and I must have said something like, "What a miracle." And the nurse in the living room next to me says, "Yes, isn't it amazing how things evolved?" It wasn't the time for a vikuach, but I wanted to grab her. I wanted to say, "Lady, are you paying attention? Do you understand we just experienced the greatest miracle without any human intervention? Within the womb, the baby forms. Within the womb, it doesn't breathe. The minute it comes out, it needs to breathe. The entire process." And you say the words, it evolved a lucky roll of the cosmic dice. And I got to see exactly what this Ramban was saying. You could stare at the greatest miracles and deny Hashem. You could study nature and deny Hashem. That's free will. If you want to grow, what Hanan explains is one thing you have to do. Put away your agenda. Ask yourself, what does my eye see? What do I think happened? Forget the what ifs. If I accept a God, then this, if that. What do I see? If you put away your agenda, your ifs and thens and buts, and just ask yourself, you'll see with clarity Hashem's world. You'll see your Creator. You'll see the brilliance and goodness of your Creator. But you have to put away your agenda. You have to ask yourself, what does my mind tell me? What do I really see? If you do that, you see Hashem. If you don't want, you could live through miracles and not see Hashem, because that's Bechira. That's what the Mitzrim lived through. And that's what we have the opportunity to experience or deny in our day today.